Here we have, absolutely crazy, somebody suspended in water in a diving tank, and they had to wear individual latex masks with breathing tubes. Yeah, and here's the safety man sitting outside.
There's no sound, no light, and the water is kept at 95.3 degrees Fahrenheit, in which you feel neither hot nor cold. This means that you can meditate, and meditate very, very easily because you're freed of all known physical stimulation. Now, there may be unknown physical stimulation going on, such as that of mental telepathy.
Tank. Lilly was what you would call a psychonaut. Literally.
Conducting sensory deprivation experiments using a variety of techniques, such as Native American narcotics and isolation tanks, to probe the depths of the human unconscious, John C. Lilly believed his experiments connected him to cosmic entities by way of a broad-based communication network. Lilly dubbed the beings that were guiding him ECCO, Earth Coincidence.
Well, the first time I was in the tank with LSD in St. Thomas, I was panic-stricken, and I took 300 micrograms of LSD injection, and this turned out to be rocket fuel. So I went further out of my body than I ever gone before or since, and traveled through the universe and met very large intelligences way beyond us.
Further and further out. In the center of the cyclone, you described a state, in fact, you had a whole system, virtually a quantitative system for mapping states of consciousness, and you talked about one that I found most fascinating, which you call +3, mega satori. And in that state, you describe going so far out of your body, and even out of the physical universe, to the point of being at the level of essence in which the physical universe is created.
Right.
That almost seemed to me, in reading that book, like an ultimate state of consciousness, but I know you wrote about it some 15 years ago. How does it look to you now?
Well, there's one state beyond +3. That's +1. But you're not allowed to remember that. Once you go into it, you have union with God. That's the true yoga. And so you're non-human. So there's no way you can recount what happened. You have no way of saying it, because it's beyond language.
Yes.
Well, all those states. The Earth Coincidence Control Office, ECHO. And if this somehow is in communication with you, possibly unconscious, but it controls your long-term coincidences, and you must exert your best intelligence to do the short-term ones. And ECHO says you must expect the unexpected every hour of every day. And
recently into pushing to see, what really were the limits.
right.
Going into new realities, taking on the belief systems of those realities, and then coming back to your basic working reality and challenging those beliefs, integrating those beliefs
Right.
with your own. In your writings, you've explored almost every state of consciousness I could imagine, the various
vision. The insane meditations that need to be taking place to actually conjure up echo and to be able to see higher sensory, perceiving, intelligent life forms. What you have to do is insane, a lot of hard work. It doesn't need to be done with molecules, but we're using another one of John C. Lilly's favorite tools for inducing this state of consciousness: dissociative anesthetics. Dissociative anesthetics have been proven to kind of be a lot like sensory deprivation tanks. They disconnect the user from their body, and to a point, apparently what happens is the patients emerge using ketamine. Emergence has been a symptom that has been recorded by doctors for a very long time. I don't know what it means to emerge out of a drug that's supposed to disconnect you from your body, but it's a waking lucid dream, at least. And this is what I'm going to continue. I'm going to talk about what happened when we did this. Patterns of phenomena. In my experiences using DXM with a variety of different folk, many people have reported similar sensory experiences and subjective feelings. These all put together have created a primal understanding of what could happen after you take a dissociative anesthetic substance. Subjectively, one thing that happens to many people is the dissociative will sedate and tranquilize the user. Eventually, they will be stuck lying on their back with their eyes closed. Unless it's PCP, because PCP seems to have more of a LSD-like effect of stimulation, so it ends up keeping people awake for quite a while. And that's why there's a difference between some dissociative anesthetics and others. Ketamine and dextromethorphan and some analogs of ketamine seem to always have that sedating, tranquilizing effect. And although they're lying on their backs with their eyes closed, they subjectively feel like they can still see the outlines of the external world outside of their closed eyes in kind of a transparent manner. Usually at first, they're concrete, but eventually more and more transparent as it keeps going. And it kind of, so if you were in your room, you would specifically imagine your room, but it would start to kind of become more and more distorted as you lost touch with your body and your external world. And slowly, as the substance begins to kick into its peak, the user will become unable to really remember or project any external reality inside his mind. To me, one time I used dextromethorphan and I had my eyes closed, but I stood up in my room, walked over to my table, and I picked up a pair of scissors, even though my eyes were dead closed. But at the time, I really couldn't understand. I thought my eyes were open. It almost had a high-dose dissociative anesthetic experience. Almost has that type of dimethyltryptamine effect, where right after you smoke it, your eyes just shut down like there's like it's a garage door that you just can't get open. And like, even no matter how hard you try, it's just they're locked down. They're just. But it was strange because I was able to walk across the room and pick up a pair of scissors because I could project it in my mind. Maybe this was my mind compensating for a loss of sensory stimulation, but it was quite strange. So you could project whatever you want into a room as if it were a lucid dream, which is the strangest part, and that's why I've always described dissociative anesthetics as being completely awake but inside of a lucid dream. And so you can project things that you want to see, but there's always this kind of a sense that even using dextromethorphan by itself, it kind of takes you where it wants to take you, even though it feels like you have like some kind of like you can project small things. The overall experience just kind of takes you where your mind really was wandering in the first place. And so, as a user becomes unable to remember and project his external reality, this comes along with one of the most strange subjective events that a human being could ever report. This subjective event or happening or feeling or emotion or something has been reported by numerous people. 5 people that I know, and I know that's not a really high sample study, but if you go on Irwan and just read some trip reports of numerous people who use this substance, breakthrough type experiences are so common. And specifically, people that I've known and talked to who use the substance, they say that they experience material, physical reality become transparent, and they feel themselves either able to float through the ceiling or fall through the floor. And it's kind of like in a weird movie in a sense, where a soul can float through a wall but your body can't. In this astral projected type of realm, you end up kind of floating through material space in a rather strange way. I know that it could all... The one thing I always wonder is, did I imagine? Because I've had the subjective experience of floating up through the ceiling like my head was a balloon, and my soul was a balloon, and it just kept floating. There was nothing to keep it down on Earth anymore. and I floated through the ceiling, and I seen the top of my house as if it was Google Earth. And I'm not a real tech savvy guy. I've never really looked at Google Earth. I never looked at my house specifically. I've looked at some other weird stuff, but I was wondering if my mind projected me, like seeing the top of my house, or if that actually happened. And that's the thing with using dissociatives like dextromethorphan and ketamine. You really sometimes end up questioning whether or not reality even is real, or what kind of, like, what subjective event. Does subjective reality, is that real reality, or is subjective reality only one nodule in all types of realities? The laws of physics are completely broken after using a dissociative substance, even on its own. And this is what I've been talking about. All these experiences all happen under only the influence of dextromethorphan. And the users experience after floating through the floor or falling up through the ceiling. I said that wrong, but they will be immersed in a new room. And it's almost kind of, so everyone always kind of explains it as if it were like an elevator shaft at first, like it was a janky elevator shaft, and like there's rooms above you, below you, parallel to you, and in all different kinds of directions. And my theory is that this kind of these substances almost tripwire the brain into accidentally somehow breaking its own perception of three-dimensional space. Inside of your mind, it's almost like if the way that your brain dreams, it's like folds physical reality on top of itself, and it creates an artificial physical reality inside of a stored database, quite like something that you would experience in a Matrix movie. But I'm not going to be conspiratorial. I'm saying there's only certain ways to be able to access that state for long periods of time. Dreaming is one of them. Dissociative substances are one of them. And John C. Lilly pioneered both methods of dissociative substances and the sensory deprivation tank. And using both of these methods, you can have very strange experiences where the laws of physics are completely broken and material becomes transparent and conscious. During this point, when you're in this experience, you will not remember that you've even taken a dissociative substance. Maybe in a float tank, if you haven't fallen asleep, you'll remember that. But dissociative substances kind of pigeonhole you into not even remembering the cause of why this experience is happening. So when you are dreaming, you're immersed in a new realm or a new physical space that's created inside of your mind as like a folded physical dimension. And it is experienced completely as subjectively real. Meaning, you might be thinking that you're wandering through a town or an enchanted forest or a fucked up hotel with distorted monster creatures, or anything that your mind really could imagine could be the case. And that's the thing that's so strange about is I'm giving you the keys really to go to another world. And this world is a completely different world, and the only thing that I really could gather from what has happened when I use these substances is there is a different type of intelligence. It's a different kind of consciousness or awareness of itself. The universe has a healing ability, and when we let the universe be, it heals itself, really. So I feel like there's such a basic fundamental starting point of all consciousness, and it's of all creation and thought, and that you can reach this realm where this is accessible in human viewing, I suppose, more in a way that it could be projected or manifested to you completely purely as if you were a baby. But in a sense, it almost seems like it's up to you. It's more like a lucid dream rather than a very organized psychedelic experience like a LSD or psilocybin mushroom experience. There feels like there's some type of morale to the trip or some place that it's specifically taking you. Dextromethorphan or dissociatives alone don't seem to have such an aim or focus. It completely immerses you into a new realm, but without your knowing and without really the intellectual, rational mind to be able to categorize it. So that's the hard part about this whole thing. And the first experience I had where this played a role, when I first used dextromethorphan, I'd seen lost in these dream worlds, envisioning these beautiful landscapes, and somehow something in my mind told me that I was a human being, and it was kind of like being woken up inside of a lucid dream by yourself. And right after I heard my internal voice say that, after kind of wandering aimlessly in these colorful dream worlds, my internal voice said that I needed to open my eyes. But when I opened my eyes, my soul was ripped out of my body, and I had one of these out-of-body experiences. The first time I ever used dextromethorphan. I could see myself underneath myself, and I was lifted like a balloon, or floating kind of like a balloon, very buoyant in the atmosphere. And I floated all the way to the atmosphere. And then, but I returned to my body like a yo-yo. So dextromethorphan, the first time I used it by myself, I had that experience, but only a tipping taste of it. And it was like I was a yo-yo. Flew into space and came right back. So similar and more detailed explorations of this phenomenon have been recorded, and the whole point of this video is I use dissociative substances. I had that experience on dissociatives alone. I thought, what could happen if I used dissociatives with tryptamine specifically? Not lysergamines, I mean tryptamines like psilocybin and dimethyltryptamine. And so I used dissociatives, mostly only dextromethorphan and a little bit of nitrous, but with tryptamines like 4-ACO-DMT, 4-HO-MIPT, and 4-HO-MET. And these are research chemical tryptamines that can get converted to psilocin. 4-ACO-DMT specifically gets converted to psilocin very rapidly, but some of these other substances have different mechanisms of action, but not very different. They all really kind of interesting. And yeah. So similar and more detailed explorations of this phenomenon have been recorded. And the dissociative realm of the experience is so wildly unpredictable, but when mixed with tryptamines, it is amplified to an extent. So, now, like I said, I'm going to talk about the times that I used dextromethorphan in accordance with other tryptamine substances, and I mixed them together, and it totally, I'll tell you what happened. So on this curious night, I had taken about 540 milligrams of dextromethorphan and 60 milligrams of 4-HO-MET. Now, 4-HO-MET was an interesting research tryptamine chemical, but it was the most potent research tryptamine chemical was 4-ACO-DMT, which was very similar to psilocin. But 4-HO-MET was not as similar, but cheaper to buy, and so I bought some of it. But I also thought it would be nice to kind of ease myself into it since it was a less potent substance. This combination was chosen carefully as a way to dissociate my mind from my body, but also amplify the mechanisms of the psyche. I laid down, waiting for the effects to kick in. I began to become very tranquilized. I was forced into a deep meditative state, searching for breath. Searching, like it must have been hard. Sometimes it can be hard to remember how to breathe when you're tripping. The first thing that I noticed that was unlike any standard tryptamine experience that I've ever had was I was able to see the world around me with my eyes closed. It was almost kind of like when I closed my eyes, I could see like the echoes of all the noises hitting against the wall, and my brain could calculate how far away it was. I know it sounds strange, but my mind was projecting new forms into the familiar forms of the world that I could see with my eyes open. But as I was it was almost kind of like I was scanning the room like sonically with like a radar. It was really strange. The surfaces were made of transparent material. The edges and ridges of the forms, though, around the transparent material were morphing and starting to become less recognizable. And I was kind of starting to think, oh shit, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm obviously not going to stay here. And I began to feel this feeling of material being very void. And I could feel the transparency of things like floors and walls and ceilings. But then again, once again, I was able to use this elaborate exploring system that I call the elevator shaft. This is what I dubbed it. I've heard some other people calling it stuff like this, like experiences they've had on ketamine. And it's kind of like you can explore the mind using this it's like an elevator shaft. And I was traveling deeper and deeper inside of my mind. I somewhat lost track of how deep I was going into the elevator shaft. I was exploring different like caverns and walking down these like hallways and opening new doors. I blanked out after a while though, and when I woke up or became conscious again, my soul was ripped out of my body. and it was like I flew into the sky, and I was suddenly floating above myself, looking down at myself, and I could see myself lying down where I was, and I said, I guess I really wasn't staying here, and I continued to float. So as I see myself, I flew above my house, and then I seen the top of my house, and I continued to float out of my house until I was rising like a balloon to the atmosphere. I know it sounds insane, but this is what happened to me. This is the way that I experienced it. I could see, it seemed like it looked like Google Earth almost. I could hear the most intense sounds. It sounded like the frequencies of like the Earth's magnetic poles, like, and the plates in the Earth. I don't know these geography terms. It was a deep rumble of the earth shifting. Sounded to me a lot like I was picking up signals from physical phenomena, but also radio stations. The formal language of these transmissions seemed to reflect that these were government-used frequencies. I was like, it sounds like they're talking about something important. And it was like, but there's different governments from different languages. It was like my brain somehow accidentally tapped into the Soviet Union's, the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, but back in the day they sent out fake, or not fake, but just like code signals. But it also, I heard like Chinese languages, but it sounded like I was some kind of government radio station. And I looked as deep as I could see into the universe. It's like my eyes were like looking to the edge of everything, looking deeper and deeper and deeper, kind of like one of those fractal videos where you keep going in. And I could see every star was connected by some sort of energy, and all of the stars in the universe were connected like a network. And it reminded me to things that I've seen, like natural mycelium networks. I could see this interconnecting energy was animate. And by that I mean it was conscious and alive. My soul seemed to stray further and farther from all that I've ever known in the physical universe. It was, in a sense, an empty space, but it wasn't empty for long. I was in and out of these empty spaces, and I began to see forms and orbs of light. Giant, these huge big balls of light. And when I floated through them, and it would illuminate my soul, and while I was floating through them, I could hear millions of voices that sounded like an advanced alien language. And outside of these forms, I could see smaller sources of light, and these moved rapidly and sporadically. I could understand or tell that I was similar to these forms. We had a limited lower conscious, only capable of visiting a realm of higher order for a short period of time. I understand that right at this moment, the moment you read these words, that this higher transcendent state and the consciousness that inhabits it are still there in that space. One thing that I forgot to mention is that every time that I move through these giant orbs of light, the way that I described it to a friend, which is a kind of a funny way to describe it, was it felt like I was joining an intergalactic Call of Duty match. I know that's a really stupid way to put something that's supposed to be very serious, but it was like these lobbies. It was like a lobby of these different kinds of creatures that have attained different types of like spiritual status, but there were some creatures that seemed to be totally rooted in type of like an infinite type of life. And I mean, I could easily feel that type of infinite lifeline when I go out into the middle of the forest and feel like a mycelium network, because it is one giant strain of life. That's what all life on Earth is. But it was strange, man, because I didn't feel alone. And I remember I felt like there was much chaos in the universe, but also similar to like what John C. Lilly says, it almost kind of seemed like there were characters up there. I mean, they're benevolent types of forces, which I guess like it maybe characterized the types of patterns of nature, or I don't know what it was, but it was almost like all-knowing, all infinite forces that were somehow always alive, but through the soul somehow. I don't know. And so now I'm going to talk about, that was my second most intense experience I've ever had in my life. life, and now I'm going to talk about my first most intense experience, which was inspired by that experience. So what happened was I had that experience, and I thought, wow, man, I really found something neat here with this whole, if I take dissociatives and tryptamines at the same time, man, it really is neat. Something weird happened there. I mean, it could be explained to, like, maybe something as simple as the dextromethorphan has the MAOI type of effect, or maybe somehow it prolongs the tryptamine experience, or something like that. But I still have yet to actually experiment with MAOIs and tryptamines, so I'm going to be doing that as well. But dissociatives are dangerous, so I wouldn't do them often. I would do ketamine if you're going to do any of them. Don't use dextromethorphan, but I'm your guinea pig. So I called this the Day of Reckoning. And so I decided this time I wanted to use DMT with dissociatives with dextromethorphan. So I've had multiple experiences smoking N,N-dimethyltryptamine that were very strange and profound in nature, but I couldn't analyze them as closely as I wanted because everything I experienced was in a hyperspatial dimension that was induced, by this DMT, and it was moving much too fast for me to comprehend. And I told my friends every time I've ever had experiences with DMT that it looked like a bunch of geometrical flashing shit that sometimes would turn into like images and symbols, and that's about it. And everyone was like, oh bro, but it's so much more than that. I'm like, I'm sure it is, but you don't just find DMT in the Midwest, the United States often. I mean, unless you grow it yourself or know someone that comes from Mexico. And so, but I couldn't really get much out of the DMT experience. It just kind of seemed like a lot of pretty colors, and like, it seemed like a novel type of experience to me, almost kind of like a novelty thing. But, so I thought, well, if using tryptamines like 4-HO-MET works so well, then maybe using it with DMT with dissociatives would. So I set up the right environment and factors to dive deeper into my subconscious than ever before. In order to slow down the DMT experience, I used 540 milligrams of dextromethorphan as a way to dissociate my mind to my body. I waited till the peak of my trip, which was already very intense, and smoked DMT. The dissociation caused by DXM successfully slowed down the hyperspatial dimension induced by DMT. When I analyzed it, I had planned to, I realized I know how zoomed in or slowed down. It was the things inside the psyche that will fractal to infinity. And after the experience, I had a journal and wrote down as much as I possibly could. And so this is that story from my journal that I'm reading to right now. Right after I smoked the DMT, my body started to decay. I looked down at my hands from a first-person point of view, and I seen my body decaying. I seen my hands decaying. I could feel myself rotting. My flesh was melting. My hand was melting right in front of me. And right before everything just started to black out, it was like an angel is what I first called it, but now I'm calling it a higher consciousness creature or being or something that was trying to protect me. Some type of entity caught my soul, and right before my soul hit the ground, and my soul was outside of my body, but when I looked down to see what was left of my body, it was just a pile of dust. And it seemed deformed to me, and the top of my house, and it was just like the second time I did it, but I was like, oh shit, the first time I did this, my body was there, now it's a pile of dust. I was like, fuck, I really did it this time. And that really is the sentiment of the trip. It really seemed kind of like it was like these entities from this higher realm were directly communicating with me, because it was like I poked them somehow. It was like I hit something, or I hit a vein of some sort. And so after the angel caught my soul, and I was flying through space, it was like we were traveling sideways through space, or we were going so fast that I was like, we have to be going straight through like things right now. It was like that's how fast we were going. We were flying through planets, yeah, I knew it was too fast for me to understand, and things were moving too fast. And this is a space that is very hard to describe, much like when somebody cracks a whip and you hear the sound barrier be broken. This experience felt like physical space was broken and the material forms of all things were transparent. The alien hyperspatial intelligence that I seem to refer to as an angel, which I'm not sure if it really was an angel, but it protected me, was guiding me and moving me freely through time and space. And I could see symbols fly by my face. It was kind of goofy. It kind of made me feel like I was in a sci-fi movie, because it was, at that point, it seemed like there was nothing that was technically real. And we started to slow down though, and by symbols, I think that I meant like I started seeing things that were recognizable, like trees, and like nature eventually started building itself around me, and it started turning into like this physical realm, and it started growing, and the vegetation came, and the fragmented pieces were falling into place, and it started to become more and more recognizable until it was a place with it just seemed like a normal garden. I understood it was a forested area flourishing with beauty, and it seemed kind of like this angel that caught my soul, placed my soul on top of pillars in a clearing. So it was like right in the middle of everything, and there was just a little clearing around me, and then there was forest it was not like a wild forest, it was like a forest where all the trees were set together symmetrically, and the flowers were all placed for the colors to almost like look like they were like I guess complementing each other, and all the flowers were so beautifully placed. And the pillar that I was on top of looked like something that was from ancient Greek temple. It was really insane. So I was looking at the garden, and it reminded me of what people have described as Eden, or from the Bible. Just a very ancient and rich place that no matter what, nothing is ever probably going to change. It's always going to be the same way there. And as I scanned and looked around it, I realized that in the center of the garden, I guess in the center of what was in front of me, because I was placed on a pillar, and then in front of me there was this little lake, and I looked to I kind of looked around. I kind of asked. I was like, "What am I supposed to do?" I thought that. I didn't say it, and then all of a sudden, it was like my question was answered instantly, and the place was that I had to go is the lake, of course, because that's what I see in that one. And I walked up to the lake, and it looked like any old lake, but when I jumped in it. So I jumped in it, kind of like I felt like I needed to be refreshed. And I just dove head first. And the moment that I did that, I realized I wasn't in the same place anymore. I was somehow interwoven with the fabric of infinite different realities, all playing at their present moment. I was almost like the fixture of like one reality, like a lamp in one reality, and then in another reality, I was going through a divorce, and then I was like living 50 million people's different lives all at once. Like my soul was spread out across the universe like butter, and I could see all these different realities playing out into the future for their logical conclusions. And the specific realities I was seeing seemed to be chosen to me, and they seemed to be some form of energy that had intelligence that was trying to show me something. And I was living in different lives and dying and like being reborn, and it was like so quickly. I was like, how it felt like I was living thousands of years, and it was like this strange type of like, I know this is another dumb way to describe something, but it's ways that people understand. There's an episode of Rick and Morty where they play a game where you literally live someone's entire life, but it happens in like 17 minutes. That's kind of how it felt, but it felt really strange. And so I realized quickly, though, that there was this form of intelligence that represented death. And so, he was like the Reaper. And I was in this like purgatory like realm because At that point, I had already lived 5 times and died, and so I was kind of like in this weird place. It was almost kind of like an elaborate mirror maze of thousands of years, and I was playing a game of cards with the Reaper, and I was seeing the faults of humanity, like failing over and over again. But every card that was dealt was a different reality that I could see stretching into the future. And in these realities, I had to choose different moral positions. It most definitely seemed as if I were playing different games. But these games were ultimate truths and evils of existence. And I went way in over my head. And I didn't have the right tools to handle myself, even almost properly in these realms. And that's why I kept dying over and over and over and over and over again. And I was supposed to keep dying infinitely until I found peace. And it was nuts. It's like Groundhog Day in a fucking psychedelic trip. And I once again became aware of that sense. And that I was a speck of sand that floated by for a couple of seconds compared to the higher intelligence that I had witnessed. Eventually the elaborate game that I was playing with the Reaper ended. And it was almost kind of like he spared me in a sense. He took pity on me. And he still does take pity on me to this day, and I can tell. And so it sounds like I'm telling you a story here, but that's what I experienced. And so the type of experiences, these are dissociative experiences. And so the thing that I have to stress is that you don't realize that you're in a dissociative experience. So the things that I described were actually as if they were happening to me in the present. And like I've said, I've had friends experience themselves like falling through the floor and things like that. I've had friends experience themselves be able to lucid dream but fly over towns and stuff. And it's a reoccurring theme with psychedelic users that they feel like they can see with their soul in places that they're not technically allowed to see. And it's a really strange phenomena that I'll call telekinesis. And it's also a weird bag because with dissociatives, they're addictive. They're addictive, and you become this crazy psychedelic soul jumper where you think that you can fucking fly through different realities and do this type of shit all the time. But for me, after that experience that I just described to you, I have been locked out of this the astral realm. Trust me, I've definitely tried to reach that state, but I am not willing to actually put my body through the amount of damage that it takes using dissociative substances to do so. And so it's almost crazy. It's like I either need to go to a sensory deprivation tank and try again or something, because it's definitely a hard thing. Since then, I've definitely had lucid dream experiences. I had a lucid dream experience where I thought that I revisited the garden that I went to and I seen inside the lake again. And I think that the mind stores those types of experiences. But obviously you can tell that I don't really remember it. I try my best to remember it, but I really don't remember it. And a lot of what I'm going on is what I immediately wrote right after the experience. But I still think that for me, the experience showed me that nature is just like the garden that I visited. It's a place that should infinitely be able to work. It's a cycle that should infinitely be able to work. And you should be able to feel almost as if you're a part of that infinite cycle. But the way that our modern society chokes us and kills us as a Western society says that we need to have cars and oil and fucking so since everybody needs to have cars, there needs to be 50,000 oil spills all the time, and fucking we gotta have heavy metals, and we need plastic trivia, and then now we got fish that they cut open with plastic coming out of them and shit. It's just not a good reality. And I feel like having these types of shamanic soul-searching experiences wakes you up to that, but also it forces you to be creative, because you can't just be a fucking white liberal that whines about something on the internet and expect anything to change. You actually need to go out and talk to people that have different opinions than you and try to you don't want to change them, you just want to show them that it's in their best interest for all of humanity to work together and save nature. So